As you are doubtless now aware, there was an attempt to assassinate former President Donald Trump. The facts of the case won't fully emerge for a while now, but that doesn't mean we can't attempt to understand it or the ramifications it will have. One of those ramifications is that the USA is now likely to swing the furthest right it has ever been. Pretty much full fascism. The only thing that might somewhat save the USA from this threat is the sheer slowness of trying to steer such a massive, turgid nation any which way at all. And Trump being really old and not being able to live that much longer, assassin or no assassin. So does that threatening, looming swing to the far right justify an assassin's bullet? No, of course not. But there are ramifications from all of this. This, as a student of history, appears to be America's Horst Wessel moment. And no, I'm not comparing Trump to Hitler. I'm drawing parallels in historical events, which, in the same way Star Wars used to, rhyme. Horst Wessel was a member of the Sturmabteilung, the SA, the old paramilitary precursor to the SS in the Nazi Party, the street thugs. In 1930, Horst Wessel was murdered by two members of the Communist Party of Germany. And after his death, Joseph Goebbels made him into a martyr for the Nazi Party. Taken by itself, this was, of course, a murder, and horrendous, obviously. However disgusting the person who was killed was. Taking a step back, this event was one of the catalysts for one of the worst cataclysms of the 20th century. This was just one of the many events that tipped the balance in Germany and which allowed authoritarian fascism to come to the fore and take over. But it was an important one. It was a key moment that helped turn people against the German left, as someone pointed out on Facebook. All Hitler had to do was to appear to be less crazy and dangerous than the communists. Comparisons to Nazism are often hyperbolic, and were this still 2016, I would agree with you that they're completely unfounded here. And I'm still not saying that Trump is Hitler. But this time around, I don't think that level of caution is unjustified. Trump is petty, vindictive, not terribly bright, and did a lot of damage to the USA before. And that was when there were relatively level heads in the room to help steer and cushion his worst excesses and hem him in a little from stepping outside of the bounds of his office. Despite all of that, he managed to blow a multi-trillion-dollar hole in the US budget, bungled the response to COVID, ordered an illegal assassination on foreign soil, and corruptly used his office for profit, pretty much constantly, before finally inciting a fortunately incompetent attempt to subvert US democracy. This time around, if he gets power, and he probably will, there are unlikely to be any level heads left around or anyone unwilling to go along with his successes. It will be Trump sycophants and cronies and many of the worst people in US politics who have an open and proud agenda for authoritarian Christo-fascism. No, that's not a conspiracy theory. This isn't QAnon or Pizzagate or Flat Earth. Project 2025, Agenda 47, or whatever they've changed the name to try and avoid scrutiny. It's out there, it's public, it's a blueprint for a far-right, theocratic takeover of the US government. Yes, trans activists are annoying, but they only really wield social power. Is getting back at that tiny minority of annoying people really worth dismantling American democracy, pluralism, The fair and equal rule of law, the First Amendment, the separation of church and state? Is it worth the abrogation of women's and reproductive rights? Probably not, right? And yet that's what's being threatened. And does that threat justify an assassin's bullet? No, of course not, but it does make it understandable. When Edgar Madison Welch marched into Comet Ping Pong and fired his gun, he was out of his goddamn mind, but he believed he was doing the right thing, trying to save children from a paedophile ring. That threat wasn't real, but his actions are understandable in context if you practice compassion, if you try to understand the headspace he was in and what he believed. To understand a thing is not to condone a thing. The threat of the American far right is far more plausible than any of that nonsense is. And even if you dismiss it as a conspiracy theory, it's still out there, in the open, published and advocated for proudly by people attached to the probably incoming Trump administration. And so if you practice compassion, even if you don't believe the threat, even though it is published and out there and proudly stood by influential people, you can at least perhaps understand why someone might resort to the ultimate sanction in the way that Edgar Madison Welch marched into Comet Ping Pong. Again, to understand a thing is not to condone a thing. Now obviously, given bitter experience, I should know better than to try and have a nuanced, thoughtful and intellectual discussion during a time of anti-intellectualism. No nuance and barely any thought, especially around events like this, where people have been very reactive. I made the same mistake in trying to contextualize 9/11 when it happened, and when people asked why it happened, I made the mistake of telling them. They didn't actually want to know. In the wake of this event, people have similarly gone off the deep end on both extreme wings, and the only thing faster than the conspiracy theories, then as now, is jokes. But for all that you've seen disgusting takes or mischaracterized caution on what passes for the American left, the people right of centre have gone completely nuts. Trump already had a messianic cult amongst the megachurch pastors on the right, and that has now kicked into overdrive and spread towards the centre-right. You do have people on what is misnamed the American left saying disgusting things, yeah, but it's far, far worse and far more concerning from the American right now, because that's more organised, more unified, and it has its sights set on the levers of state power. I'm not surprised there was an assassination attempt on Trump. I was surprised there wasn't one against Obama. After all, America only seems to manage to kill the good ones. The bad ones, like Reagan, only get botched attempts. But let's have a little thought experiment here. At what point do you consider political violence to be justified? If you believe the previous election was stolen, was the violence in response to that justified? In what situation would you consider it to be justified? Most people agree that assassinating Hitler would have been a good thing for the world. You might argue over the timing of it, whether it would have stopped the Nazis, when it was justified versus when it wasn't, whether you go back in time and throttle him as a child in the crib, or shoot him once the final solution starts. But it's clear that most people feel that things like mass genocide, sparking a global war, those sorts of things, do justify assassination. So at what level is it no longer justifiable? Would you have assassinated Stalin? As equally as murderous as Hitler, albeit over a much longer time frame and largely due to incompetence rather than malice? Pol Pot? Pinochet? Margaret Thatcher? That last one sounds like a joke, but the IRA felt it was justified and tried to kill her or another conservative head of the British government multiple times. And I wouldn't be surprised if some members of the LGBT community would have felt killing her was justified during the period that she wanted to put gay people into camps so they wouldn't give anyone else AIDS. Does that justify an assassin's bullet? No, of course not, but to them it did. right? And if we practice compassion, we can understand why they felt that it did. And maybe when we find out things about this would-be assassin, we can understand why they did what they did. Or it could just be a nut job. But Trump doesn't cease being a corrupt, oily, multiple felon, adjudicated rapist and threat to American democracy and freedom just because someone shot him. Indeed, the messianic mantle that seems to have been given to him by these events seems to be enabling the potential for him to do even worse. And the repercussions of another Trump presidency, now virtually assured, for America and the world are far-reaching and not at all good. From appeasement of other authoritarians to the undermining of NATO to doubtless a doubling down on wealth transfer from the poor to the already rich, arch nationalism and persecution of minorities. I lose friends all the time from sticking to principle and from having nuanced second and third order thinking. That is, what are the implications of this? What are the implications of the implications of this? Doubtless I'll lose some again from attempting to understand and grapple with these events and from discussing the consequences of them and the potential consequences of another Trump government. Anyone who can turn on a dime and make you their enemy like that probably isn't worth having around anyway, though it'll sadden me, but I'll take it, same as ever. It saddens me more that people who consider themselves patriots and to care about freedom, who say they hate censorship and authoritarianism and value freedom and individuality, will cheer this on as long as all those things come from their side. They feel that they're okay. And that's saddening, but it's not a lesson I've not learned before. Whoever took that shot is a fucking idiot, and this is about the worst version of events that could have happened. And that person is more likely to see what they fear come to pass because of what they did. But then Americans have never really understood irony.